In this lecture, we are going to work with checkboxes. To start, I launch Android Studio. As you can see, I have updated my Android Studio to version 2.3, and I recommend that you always keep your Android Studio up to date as well. To create a new project, click on Start a new Android Studio project. In the application name section, I enter the name of my project. I name it, for example, Checkbox. And my project is stored in the Material Design Projects folder. I click on Next. I set the minimum SDK to API 15 and Next. Empty activity and Next. And Finish. I wait until Android Studio creates my project. Alright, the Gradle operations ended successfully and my project was created. Now I go to the resource section and inside the layout folder, I open the activity main layout. I go to the text section and also activate the preview pane. If you notice carefully, in this new version of Android Studio, you see that there has been a couple of changes in our activity main layout. For example, we don't see the default paddings in our layout anymore. Also, the root element of our layout has changed to constraint layout. Now I'm going to remove constraint layout completely and use relative layout instead. In the preview section, I set the height and width of my relative layout equal to match parent. And I close the relative layout completely. Inside the relative layout, I'm going to define an AppCompatCheckBox. AppCompatCheckBoxes are good substitutes for normal checkboxes, and one of their advantages is that they preserve their material characteristics in Android below Lollipop. So I type android.support.v7.widget.appCompatCheckbox. Alright, my AppCompatCheckbox requires a height and a width. In the preview pane, I set its height and width to wrap content. You see that my AppCompatCheckbox was created under the toolbar. I also define an ID for it, for example, @ID/checkbox_ID. After setting its ID, I'm going to give it a margin of 16 dp. I also give it a text. For example, I type checkbox. I press Alt and Return, extract string resource, and OK. Alright, now let's run our project as is on emulator. Run using the emulator for Nexus 6 and OK. The application was run on the emulator. As you can see, we have an AppCompat checkbox below our toolbar. And by default, the checkbox is unselected. If we click on the AppCompat checkbox, it will be selected. If I click it again, it gets unselected and selected again. So it can be said that AppCompat checkboxes are like switches that have on and off states. By default, AppCompat checkboxes are unselected. As in switches, we can define the checked attribute for our AppCompat checkbox and set the default state of our checkbox to selected. So after text, I'm going to type Android:checked and I set its value to true. As you can see in the preview pane, our checkbox is selected by default. Now I launch my application on the emulator. Alright, the app is running on the emulator. As we expected, when the app is launched, the checkbox is selected by default. That's because we set the value of the checked attribute to true. However, it is false by default, so we changed it to true. Now I'm going to change the value of this attribute to false. Now I'm going to change my checkbox's color. When the checkbox is selected, its color follows color accent. If I don't want my checkbox color to follow color accent, I must define a new style for my checkbox as I did in switches. I close the activity main layout, I go to the values folder and open colors.xml. Now I create a new color and I name it, for example, color enable. I close the color tag. For its value, I go to material colors and I select, for example, red. I copy the color code for A200, return to Android Studio, and I paste it inside Color Enable. Also, I define a color for my checkbox when it's not selected. So I create a new color, name it Color Disable, and I close its tag. For its value, I go to Material Colors and I select, for example, orange. I copy the color code for A200, return to Android Studio, and paste the code inside Color Disable. So we created two new colors, one for the selected state and the other for the unselected state of the checkbox. I close colors.xml and open styles.xml. I create a new style here. I name it, for example, checkbox theme, and I close the style. Inside the style, I define the color accent item, and I close the item. For its value, I type the color for the selected state of the checkbox. @color/color enable. In addition, I define another item. I type Android: color control normal, and I close the item. Using this item, I can specify the color for the unselected state of my checkbox. So I type @color/color disable. In fact, I'm defining my second color for this style. As you can see, Android Studio has issued an error for my items. To fix the error, I'm going to remove the Android: part from both my items. So we created a new style, and inside it we first changed the value of the color accent item, and then defined another item by the name of color control normal. And for its value, we entered the color for the unselected state of our checkbox. Now I close styles.xml and return to my activity main layout. After the checked attribute, I type app:, I import app to my layout by pressing Alt and return. I type theme. Now from the list, I reference the style that I created for my checkbox. @style/checkbox theme. Now I run my project on emulator. The color of my checkbox must be orange when unselected and red when selected. I run it. Alright, our application is running on the emulator. As you can see, by default the color of my checkbox is orange, and when I select it, it changes to red. Of course, you can use your desired colors for the selected and unselected states of the checkbox. I stop the emulator and I go to colors. I change the value of color disable to black. Now I want to teach you about checkbox methods. I open the main activity class and then I create an object from the checkbox class. I type AppCompatCheckBox. I name the object, for example, AppCompatCheckBox, and semicolon. Now inside the onCreate method, I get the reference for my object. AppCompatCheckBox equals, I cast it to AppCompatCheckBox, find view by ID, r.id dot checkbox underscore ID, and semicolon. For the checkbox, I use the method setOnCheckChangeListener. Inside the parentheses, I type new onCheckChangeListener. As you can see, the onCheckChange method was added to our class. When the state of our checkbox changes, the code inside this method is executed. In addition to this, we have a Boolean parameter named b inside this method, which we can use to check the state of the checkbox at any time. I type system.out.println and I pass it the Boolean parameter b. This statement prints out the value of b. I run the project on emulator. Alright, the project was run on the emulator. I select my AppCompat checkbox. As we expected, the word true is printed out, which means the code inside the onCheckChange method was executed. And the b parameter is equal to true when our checkbox is selected. In contrary, when the checkbox is not selected, then the b boolean parameter is equal to false. So, using the b boolean parameter, we can check whether the user has selected the AppCompat checkbox or not. So I type if b is true, then execute this, else otherwise execute this block. If the b boolean parameter was true, which means if the AppCompat checkbox was selected, then execute this block of code. You can enter your desired code inside the block. To check whether this conditional statement works, I'm going to use a toast message. I type toast.makeText. Inside the parentheses, I enter getApplicationContext. For its text, I enter checkbox is enabled. And for its duration, I enter toast.lengthLong. Finally, I call .show. I copy this portion of code and I paste it in the else section. However, I change its text to checkbox is disabled. So we defined a condition which checks to see if the AppCompat checkbox is selected. If that is the case, then a toast is displayed with the text checkbox is enabled. Otherwise, the else part will be executed and a toast with the message checkbox is disabled will be displayed. I run my project on emulator. Alright, the application is launched on the emulator. I'm going to select the checkbox. And as we expected, a toast with the message checkbox is enabled is displayed. So our conditional statement worked correctly and the toast message was displayed. This time I'm going to undo the checkbox's selection. And as we expected, the second toast message is displayed. Checkbox is disabled. You can enter your desired statements inside these blocks. And that's it for checkboxes. In the next lecture, we will be getting output from our checkbox project.